Welcome to the Dance NYC 2022 Symposium, Life Cycles, Livelihoods, Legacies. We will be with you shortly. Today's schedule. This morning, we gathered for a welcome and wake up, 10 o'clock sessions, and an 11:30 dance break presented by Kumbe Center for African and Diaspora Dance. We will now begin our 12 o'clock early afternoon sessions, followed by a nourishing lunch at 1:30. At this time, you may also explore our exhibitor hall, where we will host the virtual expo showcase. At 2:30, we will begin our late afternoon sessions, followed by a 4:15 community daily debrief, where all attendees are encouraged to attend and discuss the day's activities. And at 6 o'clock, we gather for our final keynote presentation. Accessibility. ASL interpretation and live captioning will be provided for today's session. A stream-to-text link will be posted in the chat and participation guide for access to the live transcription. Stay connected with us by posting your takeaways on social media using the hashtags DanceSymp, DanceNYC 2022, and DanceSymp2022. On Instagram at dance.nyc, on Twitter at dance.nyc, and on Facebook at dance/NYC. Community guidelines. Based on Dance NYC's values of justice, equity, and inclusion, we agree to share our opinions, challenge perspectives, and engage or debate respectfully, and acknowledge and course correct if harm is caused. Honor everyone's personhood and humanity. Not tolerate speech that is disparaging, abusive, violent, or that is intended to defame someone's character publicly. Some features not to miss. Build your agenda of sessions. Connect with other attendees. Join community conversations. Visit the exhibitor hall. Don't forget to check out the 2022 Symposium digital program book. We are happy to be in community with you. Thanks for joining.
Welcome. I'm Brooke Rucker, and I am a member of Dance NYC's Junior Committee. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a non-disabled, cisgender, Black American woman. I am calling in from the unceded land of the Munsee, Lenape, and Canarsie tribes, also known as the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bed-Stuy. I am wearing a black turtleneck. I have long, dangly earrings that end with a turquoise stone. I have locks that are loosely curled and hanging to my shoulders. They start off as black at the roots and they end as medium brown. To my right, on the wall, which is a light gray color, there are 5 hats hanging, 2 of which are black, another 2 of which are yellow, and 1 that is a blue and gold bucket hat. And to my left, there is a TV mounted on the wall. First, thank you for joining us for the completely digital 2022 Symposium held on the Whova platform. As we are at the mercy of technology, we want to remind you that there may be delays, sound issues, and changing circumstances that may occur during our time together. We invite you to extend us and each other grace and patience. Second, ASL interpreters from SignNexus and closed captioning services provided by the Viscardi Center will be available throughout the session. A stream-to-text link will also be available and posted in the chat for further reference. We will also post speaker information in the description below. And under the speakers module on the left side of your Whova web app or the menu of your Whova mobile app. This information is also available on our website. Third, feel free to post comments you want to share with the community in the chat section to the right of this event room. Dance NYC moderators will be interacting with you there. For this session, the panelists have decided to not hold a Q&A to ensure a presence of mind and ease in the conversation. However, please feel free to post your comments and reflections in the chat for the community's benefit. After the session ends, there will be a session follow-up in the community section of Whova where you can continue the conversation. Lastly, we hope you will help us to amplify these conversations. Repost, tag us, and share your takeaways on Twitter at DanceNYC, Instagram at dance.nyc, and Facebook dance/NYC using the hashtag #DanceSimp. And now, we enter Where Do We Go From Here? Dance and Climate Change. The ecological perils people are facing around the world are stark reminders that climate change is real, and the survival of the planet is at stake. Dance and art makers have been at the forefront of this issue for decades, and in this conversation, we will get a glimpse into how environmental justice and arts making can inform, instruct, and inspire people to face the crisis in dance. Curated with George Emilio Sanchez, now welcoming our moderator for the afternoon, Andrea. Welcome, Andrea.
Thanks so much, and Brooke Rocker of Dance NYC for such a warm welcome. Andrea haenggi is speaking, pronouns she, they. Calling from Lenapehoking, the ancestral and unceded lands of Lenape people, commonly known as Brooklyn, New York. Born as an identical twin in a small Swiss farming village, I have lived half of my life on Lenapehoking land. I'm wearing a light blue coverall, have long hair with purple tips. On my right side and on my left side are rescued plant bulbs from the ecocide crime on the Lenapehoking land, Aka East River Park in Lower East Side. Behind me is a white wall with a cardboard sign saying, "Where do we go from here?" Myself, I'm an interdisciplinary artist, ethnochoreobotanographer, activist of care, and co-founder of the EPA, the Environmental Performance Agency. And I'm here today as a moderator. My heart feels vibrating and warm to spend time with the amazing artist speakers, which I'm now welcoming into the space. Jill Sigman, Lehuanani DeFranco, Paloma McGregor. And with that, I would like to acknowledge that all of you guys, us and you guys who are listening will be witness our conversation in your own time and space. With that, I invite us as a community, as being together for this time, for a couple minutes of grounding. Feel your own body mass pouring through your body. And sense what body part touches a support surface and how. I will share now 4 questions with you, which are inspired by my friend Rachel Collin and artist's work. When you hear a question, we will invite silence with a couple of breaths and trace where the question is landing in our bodies. Question 1, when you think about dance, What do you think about and how do you feel? Question 2. When you think about climate change, what do you think about and how do you feel? When you think about dance and climate change, what do you think about and how do you feel? Thanks so much for participating in this question prompt. And let's hear now from the speaker now. Where do we go from here? Dance and climate change. And let's start with Jill Sigman and Fall.
So greetings, everyone. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to Dance NYC and George Emilio Sanchez. And especially, I just want to thank the co-panelists. I'm really honored to be in this amazing company today. So I am Jill Sigman. I use pronouns she, her. I'm calling in today from occupied Lenape territory, otherwise known as Upper Manhattan. And I am a non-disabled white Jewish woman with very short brown hair that's partially shaved with a little top knot. And I am today wearing a red button-down men's shirt. And I am in front of a window and a yellow wall with some plants. And I am an artist who works at what I would call the intersection between dance and social practice and visual installation. And mostly in the last decade or so, I've become very interested in the things we throw away, in things that we marginalize or cast off, because basically I think that nothing is waste. And a lot of my work is an effort to revision or re-perceive these things that our society calls waste, and to revalue those items. And I think that embodied experience is a really crucial tool in helping us to do that and to revalue certain things. And I know we'll get to that later in our conversation. Each of us is just going to present to you a little bit about our own work before we open it up. So we'll talk more about embodiment as we go. But today I'm just going to start by showing you two projects that I've been working on that have some relation to our theme today, and talk about the importance of indirect links to climate change, because basically everything is connected and we need to start to see those links to see and address the real problems that are facing us very urgently. So the first project I'd like to talk about is called the Hut Project. And let's bring on the first slide just so we have that up while I'm introducing this. The slide is showing one of the structures that I've built, and it's been built out of electronic waste in Denmark. And basically the Hut Project is a project in which I build site-specific structures out of things that other people throw away, or sometimes that nature casts off, the natural world casts off, things that we typically call garbage. And I've done this in different parts of the world. I've built 12 of these structures to date. And I think I'm doing this for many reasons, but one of them is just simply to reveal the enormity of the amount of waste that we're producing. But beyond that, I think I'm very interested in really revealing to us the ways that our waste is handled and processed, and the inequities in those ways, and how waste inequity is essentially a form of environmental racism, and who is bearing the burden of the ways that we are consuming and disposing of material goods. So these huts that I build are containers for things, and I use them to host community dialogues, to host food sharing, performances, microagriculture, teach-ins about all kinds of related issues, and workshops and other activities, composting, all kinds of different activities that are responsive to the site and the community at that site. And I'll just share some more images of them. We can go to the next slide. This was one that I built in the Norwegian Opera House in Oslo. It's a hut that is built out of mostly materials that are discarded from the opera house. And we have a lot of transparent plastics in this one, and some plants are growing on the structure. Next slide. This next one is a structure that I built in the former Greenpoint Hospital on the edge between Greenpoint and Williamsburg in Brooklyn. And it is made out of almost 100 bundles that I hand wrapped, where I was basically wrapping trash that I found in other kinds of skins that I found, cloth and paper and cardboard, and building a hut out of these bundles that I made. Let's go to the next slide. This slide reveals the inside of that same hut, and you can, I'm here sleeping in the hut on various found fabrics, and you see the inside of the bundles. Next slide. This next hut was built in Manhattan, and it's built completely out of non-biodegradable plastics. About 3,000 plastic containers were used to build this, and we're seeing a skylight in the structure. Next slide. This next hut is, this is an aerial view in this slide of a hut that was built at the Ringling Museum of Art in Sarasota, Florida. And this hut was built out of detritus from the community, from circus, which is big in that community, and also from museum exhibitions. So it's a very, very personalized kind of materials that went into this structure. Next slide. This next slide shows a structure that I built out of found natural materials in the Norwegian Arctic. And here in the slide, we see a small structure built out of birch branches and moose bones in a natural environment with a lot of green trees and a mountain in the background. Next slide. And as I said, there are many different kinds of community gatherings, discussions, tea serving, food sharing at these structures that I convene. So I'll show a few slides that reveal that. This is one in Manhattan. We can go to the next slide. And this next series is a few of these images of people gathering and sharing food. Here are guests at the hut in Brooklyn. Next slide. Guests at the hut in Oslo, having tea on the ground, sitting on the ground in the opera house, which is a bit transgressive in that environment. Next slide. And this slide shows my hands holding two small teacups that I made out of clay that I dug up from the fjord in the Arctic. And next slide. This is an image of me engaging in microagriculture, harvesting some microgreens as part of a performance at one of these structures. Next slide. And this is another slide from a performance, dance performance at one of the structures in Sarasota. So before I move on, I think it's really important to talk about what waste has to do with climate. It's important to spell it out because it's not obvious, and as I've said, everything is connected. And I believe that our willingness to fragment these environmental harms and these environmental issues is only contributing to further injustice and further inaction. So it's really important to connect the dots. And there are four things I want to point out here. First of all, much of our waste in New York City and in this country goes to landfill, where it generates methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas, which is contributing to global warming. So basically, your waste is contributing to climate change simply by existing and going to landfill. Secondly, we ship much of our waste to landfill by truck and rail, so we're using more fossil fuels just to move the waste. Thirdly, much of our waste is non-biodegradable plastics like the ones you saw, and we're generating even more greenhouse gases producing those plastics and even recycling those plastics, even though that often seems like a valuable solution. It is actually producing more greenhouse gases. And finally, and more complexly, about 70% of our waste is actually being processed in New York City here. In the city is being processed in 3 overburdened communities, in the South Bronx, in North Brooklyn, and in southeastern Queens. And these communities are what we call environmental justice communities. They're already burdened by a lot of industrial infrastructure. They are Black and brown, low-income frontline communities, and they're communities in which people are suffering health-wise and in quality of life and in all kinds of other ways from the injustice of how industry is imposed and toxicity is imposed on the community. So these the residents in these communities are very vulnerable health-wise, and on days when it's extremely hot, when we're having extreme weather events, when we're witnessing what's happening in response to climate, people in these communities where waste is processed are feeling those effects much more, and the effects are much more dangerous than they are in other places. Further, when people in other places are feeling the effects of warming and simply not thinking and turning on their air conditioner in other parts of New York City, they're affecting people in environmental justice communities where peaker plants are also situated, and those plants fire up, and they're particularly dirty energy. They're the kind of plants that go on when we're at peak energy and we need to provide more power to the grid on extremely hot days. And those plants are extremely dirty energy that adds particulate matter to the air, is affecting all residents, but particularly children, many children with asthma, and the ways that residents all over are responding to warming and to climate is actually having an even greater impact on the folks who live in communities where waste is managed, where waste is processed. So it seems very Baroque, but these effects are really, really insidious, and they're really invisible, and that's part of the problem in terms of them not being addressed. I know my time is running short. I'm just going to say a tiny bit about this other project. If we can go to the next slide. I've also been working on a project ongoing called Weed Heart. This is one of the many plants I work with, the spontaneous urban plants that we call weeds. This one happens to be called common plantain. And these plants we call weeds, or many people call weeds, are actually just plants. Weeds are a cultural category. They're not a biological category. And these are plants that in many other places and many times have been regarded as food, have been regarded as medicine, have been regarded as spiritual guides, and have been deeply respected. And I think we have a lot to learn from these plants. We can go to the next slide. In this next slide, you see some dried weeds that I was drying to save the seed. I've been storing seed from these plants. And I think that it's been very interesting to work with them because these plants tell us a lot about the history of colonialism, in particular, other human histories, human interactions, and they also provide a lot of ameliorating effects to climate change. They're actually very connected to climate and to what we're doing to the climate. I'll show you a few more images before I explain more of that. We can go to the next slide. I stored seed from many of these spontaneous urban plants, and then I began to plant the seed and to grow seedlings and to propagate these plants, to understand their nature, to work with them in various ways. We can go to the next slide. And in the next slide, there's an image of a plant bundle that I made. I was working with a lot of fabric, reclaimed fabric, again, thrown away materials people don't want, and planting some of these often edible wild plants in these fabric bundles. This is one where 3 plants are growing out of white fabric. We can go to the next one. I've planted in other materials like stuffed animals. Here's one where we have some plants growing out of a very small stuffed hippo. And I'll go to the next slide. And I've used these bundles and other ways of propagating these plants in installations, in assemblages. This image is an installation at Gibney Dance, where I was an artist in residence, and it involves many assemblages of weedy plants, as well as a small lending library of books about plants. And it was a space that was animated by lots of discussion about these plants and their properties and their histories, and lots of food sharing. So we'll go to the next 2 slides quickly. Here's an image of people sharing food made with the weedy plants. And the next slide is another image of people gathering and having tea and discussing the histories of these plants and what that reveals about human interactions. And let's go to the next slide. This is from a performance related to these plants. It's an image of me wearing a headdress that I made out of the weedy plants that I had been working with and communicating with. And there's a hanging mattress frame in the background with some more plants on it. And we can go to the next slide. Here we have an image of me moving, dancing in a hoodie screen printed with weeds, and Katrina DeWeese, my co-performer, in the background witnessing the movement. Next slide. And here Katrina and I are lowering that mattress frame and bringing some of those weedy plants down from above into the space. And in the next slide, we can go to, Katrina is placing one of the weedy bundles on my chest as I'm lying on the floor in a position that looks like I've been killed or wounded in some way. So I guess I just want to close by saying these plants are super important to us also with regard to thinking about climate. They provide a lot of what we call ecosystem services. They offset carbon, they cool cities, they help prevent erosion through their very extensive root structures. And they, during extreme weather events, they are very resilient, so they provide food and shelter for animals. They also help remediate soil. So there are many ways that these plants are connected to what we're doing to climate in terms of how they move, how they change, where they grow, how they grow, and in terms of how they actually offset some of the effects. So I'll close just by saying that these indirect connections to climate actually are really important. Unless we start to connect the dots, I think we won't really be addressing the problem. So my answer to what comes next and where we're going is to keep connecting the dots, to reveal the ways that our practices are harmful and need to change, and to reveal new options and new models for people, and uncover what has been invisible about what is contributing to the climate crisis. So thank you for listening. I'm going to turn it over to Lehuanani now and let her tell you about her own very special work. Thanks.
Aloha mai kako o Lehuanani DeFranco ko inoa he kiaki kanaka maoli au no na pono o na oiwi e kahea ana au mai ka aina o kanaka maoli ma haiku ma ka mokopuni o Maui noho au ma na aina o Lenape a me Canarsie. Hello everyone, my name is Lehuanani DeFranco. I'm a Native Hawaiian protector for Indigenous rights. I'm currently calling from Kanaka Maoli lands, Native Hawaiian lands in Haiku on the island of Maui. But I live and am a guest on Lenape and Canarsie lands, also known as Brooklyn, New York. My pronouns are she and her, and in Olelo Hawaii, our Hawaiian language, my pronouns are oya, which is a non-gendered pronoun. We don't have any genders regarding with our pronouns. I'm a non-disabled cisgendered wahine, or woman of Native Hawaiian, Chinese, and Sicilian descent. I have fair yellow skin and thick weedy brown hair, with half of it pulled up in a messy knot. I'm wearing a black long sleeve shirt and a gray jacket, black rectangle earrings with the Mauna Kea symbol on it, and a gold necklace with the crest of the Royal Hawaiian Seal. I'm sitting outside, so my background is the lanai, or the porch of the house that I'm staying at, with a gradual sunrise that will occur over this talk. So I grew up in the Hawaiian diaspora on Manahoac territory in Virginia. I organized with Uprooted and Rising to end higher education support for big food and white supremacy in the food system. And currently I'm campaigning for the University of California to divest from the 30-meter telescope, which is slated to be built on Mauna Kea, which is our sacred mountain. I'm also a student of Olelo Hawaii, or Hawaiian language, and a student of Halau Ahia, which is a Hawaii stewardship training program that is created and led by Kekuhi Keali'i Kanakaole. And it's all about learning about Hawaiian lifeways, the language, hula, chanting, oli, as a medium to understand more about our own surrounding environment and how to malama, or take care of the land. So we can start with the first slide. So this first image, it's a computer-generated image of a green mokopuni, or island. It's a diagram actually showing the system of the Ahupua'a, which shows the water coming down from the top of the mountain all the way down to the ocean. And there are black captions identifying each area of this system. The idea of land privatization was non-existent in ancient Hawaiian culture. Instead, there was this really complex system of land division where parcels were designated according to their ecological function and the overall geography of the island's landscapes. So agriculture, individual and familial responsibilities, and there was a strict protocol of caring for the land. led to this abundance of food resources, as well as the time and freedom to engage in high artistic expressions. So a lot of the work that I do, there's in this diagram, you'll see the water that comes down into the ocean and mixes with the salt water. So that's a space that we call the mulivai. It's the river or river mouth. It's usually behind a sandbar, and it's sort of enlarged by the ocean, left there by the high tide. And so a lot of, with my work, I find myself in the intersections of multiple worlds, these in-between spaces, these transitionary spaces, but those spaces also have a purpose with themselves too. They give a lot of much needed nutrients to the fish ponds, which then fatten up the fish and provide food and sustenance to the people. And so in my work, I utilize dance and music as a medium for environmental awareness that is a transition space. So how do we motivate others to protect sacred places through movement, through protocol, by connecting them physically to the earth, grounding people in those relationships and understanding their own genealogies all the way back to the land. You can go to the next slide. So these are two photographs. They're both shot by Jimmy Clark, who's a Native Hawaiian photographer. Both images are two different times of protocol on Mauna Kea. One is noon protocol, so it's slightly brighter. You can see most of the faces and the people dancing. And then the right photo is during morning protocol at 8 a.m. So the people are more, they're more darkened. The sun is shining right down on them. And in both photos, the kia'i, or the protectors, are dancing hula on the road at Mauna Kea. In one image, they're raising their right hand up and looking towards their right hand. And in the right side image, they're holding their hands up in the symbol of the Mauna, so in the symbol of a mountain, right above their head. So the 30-meter telescope is slated to be built on our sacred mountain. This is a fight that's been happening since telescopes were first built up there in the 70s. The fight is to protect Mauna Kea from overdevelopment. And the TMT, the 30-meter telescope, is being built on the most sacred part of this mountain. And Mauna Kea has over 50 years of mismanagement. So back in 2019, there was again another frontline camp that was set up on Mauna Kea, where 34 of our kapuna, or our elders, were arrested for protecting the mountain. You can go to the next slide. So these are two more photographs by Jimmy Clark, two more side-by-side images of kia'i dancing at Mauna Kea. The left image is a shot from the waist up and shows the group dancing with both arms up and with their elbows bent at a 90-degree angle. The right image is a close-up of the lower legs and feet. These are actually my feet. So you can, my feet are barefoot. I'm wearing green pants and I'm dancing on the road. You can see the yellow line on the road. And my right leg is pointed out at a 45-degree angle, and I'm being held and supported by my left leg. So on the Mauna, there was strict protocol that was held, how to maintain yourself, how to camp at the base. And it involved chanting and hula and offering 3 times a day. And that was to continually remind ourselves why we were there, and for the community to learn a large amount of cultural knowledge that can sometimes feel inaccessible. This was a place where healthcare, food, clothing, therapy, and education were all free. There was a university that was formed up there. And the movement really demonstrated another version of society, a future version of sovereignty that was being called from the past. For me as a dancer, it made me realize that my entire dance training had been leading up to that moment of being able to understand hula just a little bit better, understand movements just a little bit better, being able to hold myself within protocol, really ground myself into the earth and research more into the genealogy that ties me directly to this mountain. There's nothing more powerful than being with this group of people and giving vai, or water or sweat. For us, the word vai, which means water, is also the same word as wealth. So if you have water, you have wealth. And so to be able to dance and chant and give yourself to these elements and the environmental structures that give you life is maybe one of the most powerful things that I've experienced. Go to the next slide. So a piece that I had done, this is a screenshot of a Adobe Premiere editing program. There's images of me standing in my backyard wearing a black outfit with a green background with plants surrounding my area. You can go to the next slide. And I completed this work during COVID with a good friend of mine, Mark Maui Kanehoalani Level, to create this piece. And so the image that we have here is a note on the cultural context. It just explains that this piece is not a hula, but it's a hakumele. So it's a less constrained performance work. And then also a note on movement scores and the different types of movement scores that I took from the Judson time period to really inform my work. You can go to the next slide. So this image is 2 columns, and it's the actual dance score that I created. To begin this collaboration, we worked with the idea of translations, from translating from English to Olelo Hawaii, translating movement into scores, translating the literal into abstract, what gets lost in those translations, what is okay to be left behind in order to find new and more intentional meanings. So these 2 scores are 2 different pieces that I created, and certain words are highlighted in different colors, and those colors correspond to the other piece where movements will match up together in the video. You can go to the next slide. So these are this is the first improv that I did. I had sent to him lighting containment, light restriction, and sun limited, dawn narrows were certain words that I had come up with while watching back on my improv. And then my friend Mark had translated those and had chose different Hawaiian proverbs that he associated with these different pieces. You can go to the next slide. And these are also different images. So there is a misty, cloudy forest, as well as a rising, burning sun that's coming up. And this was part of a second improv where he took more Hawaiian proverbs and lined them up with certain images that he was seeing inside of these improvisational movements. You can go to the next slide. And this is another one with the clouds sort of passing over the ocean, different images, and more olelo no i'aus that he put with the improv movements. You can go to the next slide. And so for the second movement score, what we did is that we took a lot of these words that we had created together and we split them in different categories. Here is just sort of identifying the initial phrases, the olelo no i'aus, and then the translations. And we did a lot of work back and forth trying to make sure that the translations were pono, they were right, that the things that were important to keep on were still there, and the things that were lost, we were just okay with letting go of. Next slide. And so we split these words into 3 different categories, into elements, actions, and situational environments. And then I took some of those words and created different structured dance. And then the ending of the piece, I recorded both of them, and there were 2 videos placed side by side of me doing these 2 different movement scores together. Next slide. And so this is just another image of different lines categorized by color and sections of what those movement scores actually were. There's 4 different colors: yellow, blue, green, and red. And those were the images and words that we sort of mixed up together. You can close the slides. Thank you. So the film is really a duet between me and myself, but also between Mark and I across oceans and across disciplines. And currently I'm in Hawaii with my cousins. We're retracing our ancestral lands and really going back to different islands, 3 different islands, and researching kuleana lands, or lands that were claimed back in the 1800s, and trying to make sure that we connect with those places. We're giving the right protocol, either hula or chanting when we're there. A lot of this for me is being able to sort of map out across the islands where our ancestors have been. I've also been working on mapping different origin stories around the world and how environmental events such as volcano explosions occur in different cultures around the world, and how different cultures explain these occurrences within their origin stories. So it's very much in the initial stages, but again, it's all about sort of mapping out what that looks like and then creating a type of movement score based on that mapping out through a more localized lens in Hawaii, and then through a more global lens throughout the entire world. And for me, it's the protection of sacred sites is combating climate change. In order to continue moving forward and protect this earth, we really have to go back to these indigenous practices and those who have been protecting our lands for so long. So the question is, how can we really push people to be more physically involved in these movements, these frontline movements? And it really starts by identifying how each culture relates to their environment specifically and how they can connect to them more. So while our chants actually do that genealogy pathway of connecting us straight to the Mauna, and you can actually trace your own family genealogy back, how does each different culture do that? And how can we pass that through generations going back and the future generations going forward? So now I would like it to pass to Paloma and hear about her work as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paloma McGregor, and I first want to say I'm so grateful to be here with the artists who have come before me, and honored to see the connectivity among our work. It's heartening. You can use she or her or my name when you refer to me. I'm calling you now from stolen Lenape land, also known as Sugar Hill, Harlem. I'm a non-disabled, cisgendered Black woman with sand-colored skin and dark brown, curly, shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing large silver hoop earrings from Crucian Gold in II, which is my homeland, colonially known as St. Croix. Behind me on the white wall is a framed brown and tan poster of dancers from the Merry Monarch Hula Festival in Hilo, Hawaii, from the year 1984, which is the year we left my homeland and moved to Maui. I'm going to try to honor over a decade of my practice and a lifetime of migration, which is rooted in generations of legacy of many who knew more than me, in less than 10 minutes. So please, nature will tell me this is not possible, but I hope I can give a sense of the essence of the work that can add to this already rich conversation. So I'm going to be talking about a project called Building a Better Fish Trap, and its latest iteration toward the end called Awireya, which in Crucian means all of us are here. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about this iterative performance project that's rooted in my reclamation of my father's vanishing fishing tradition. In this photo, you will see a 2016 performance, solo performance of this work with a video of my father's hands as he is explaining how to build fish traps projected onto me and behind me. In 2010, I went home to interview my dad about building fish traps. I needed to recenter my experience as a child of the Caribbean if my work was going to have any purpose here in the mainland. I have now developed more than a decade of practice that's seeded by this one interview. It's the same year, 2010, that the decades-old oil refinery, once the largest in the Western Hemisphere, that takes up acres of the south shore of my home island, shut down with 30 days notice rather than clean up after the EPA cited violations. Next slide. From this reclamation of my dad's tradition, my own kind of Sankophic journey emerged, this idea, this Ghanaian idea of going back to move forward. And three animating questions emerged that have driven my work and that reflect my lived experience as someone who left my ancestral home at 10. And those questions are, what do you take with you, leave behind, and reclaim? These are also questions that are urgent as my homeland finds itself at the front lines of climate emergency, at the front lines of the battle with the oil industry's destruction of culture and ecology, and at the front lines of the US's racial reckoning, all intersecting oppressions born of hundreds of years of colonialism and its viral descendant, hypercapitalism. Next slide, please. This is a photo of me standing with an outstretched right arm on one of 4 pylons in the middle of the Bronx River, kind of like islands. I'm wearing white and I have a red and black life vest on. In the left corner of the photo, you can see a canoe is approaching to help me migrate from that space to the next place. This work has helped me solidify a practice that honors the ancestral and the emergent, that roots in the generative tensions and revelations that nature shows us the way into. I'm an artist, and my vision lives in my body, which carries the bodies of my ancestors and has carried the bodies of my descendants. So this project and the big questions it's asking starts with bodies. My body finds itself after decades of migration and now rooted in Lenape land in New York City. So though this project was rooted in my ancestral home, I had to find a way to work on it here. It wasn't so hard as it turns out, because St. Croix, as we know, is not the only POC-centered place dealing with the impacts of industry. In fact, water and industry are often placed in close proximity, an arrangement in which the living ecology of place, including people, are often made to suffer. This is the case with the Bronx River, which since 2012 has been my home away from home for developing my approach to working in public space. Out of my longstanding relationship with Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance, I was sent to see now longtime collaborator Damian Griffin, who was then the education director at the Bronx River Alliance, an organization that since 1974, the year I was born, has been fighting to reclaim for the people of the Bronx River, and access to this space and site that had for decades been cut off by industry. I want to note that the photographs you'll see of my work at the Bronx River are by collaborator Charles R. Behringer Jr., a lifelong Bronx resident who passed away early in the pandemic along with his son. Next slide. This photo shows 4 bodies lying on a walkway with one more kneeling. Excuse me. Behind them are the rust legs of a large metal structure. So a crew and I, along with Charles, began doing embodied research with a cohort of mostly POC collaborators, developing my fish trap method for collaboration. Here at the Bronx River, Concrete Plant Park, relics of a past industry are left as sculpture and remembrance. I want to, in my practice, understand how our bodies operate as what I'm calling a post-memorial framework. So as we continue to honor the relics of colonialism and industry in our spaces, how do we reconsider how our bodies are a part of the memories of the spaces? How do we value the bodies as archive and monumental? And if we can honor our bodies over the objects of our creation, how can we begin to redevelop our capacity to honor the body of Mother Earth? The next few slides I'll show, one is a photo of chalk drawings at the street level storm drain, and written in chalk is storm drain to the Bronx River. So we spent a summer in 2012, next slide, doing engagements in public space in order to call more attention to the relationship between our built spaces and our natural spaces. On this next slide, we have dancers moving at the edge of the Bronx River and park goers. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. That was good intuition. And we created an interactive performance in public space. We spent time, a couple of weeks in this park with the people who call this place home, and had engagements with people around their bodies and their connection to space, measuring the space based on the length of our bodies with young people who found themselves in the space. Next slide. How many leapfrogs does it take to measure this space? Next slide. And the power of engaging in intergenerational exchange, which is rooted in my exchange with my father, who is now 96. Next slide. Also wanted to engage with the Caribbean diaspora. This is a Puerto Rican community garden that is shepherded up the hill from the Bronx River, and just trying to connect with people who have shepherding of natural spaces and cultural tradition, even in this built environment. Next slide. So a big part of my work has been honoring the emergent and the iterative, which also, the more time you spend in nature, the more you're able to see the possibilities and the essential nature of that. The questions: how do you practice bringing wild spaces into the body, into built spaces, across cultures, ecologies, and geographies, has become a driving force of my work. Next slide. In the next series of slides, you'll see me on a Brooklyn rooftop with the sound of water from my homeland playing in the background, and a large makeshift fishnet that many hands have created over the time of development of this project. Next slide. You'll see me walking down the street of my neighborhood a week before giving birth to my daughter in a performance intervention. Next slide. Collaborators at Friedman House in the Bronx, engaging with creating the early stages of improvisational practice within my practice. Next slide. Here, bringing together collaborators. Here's a picture of Christine King and Savannah Lyons Anthony in a dark black box space, lit only by sort of projections. And this was the beginning of my creation of the project Awideya, which means, again, all of us are here. And this picture is from VCU, where I began in 2019, bringing together intentionally collaborators from the US mainland and from the Virgin Islands to be in a creative exchange and a research exchange, in order to create some understanding and some urgency beyond my home island shores. Next slide. This is also the Bronx River, where it's a photo of a dancer in all white being witnessed by audience members on canoes. This is a picture from 2018 from a ritual performance along the Bronx River, intended for people who don't have a connection to the Bronx River, as well as people who do, to deepen their connection to this landscape by spending a mile and a half ride witnessing ritual performance along the river in partnership with longtime collaborators, the Bronx River Alliance and Rocking the Boat, both of whom have longstanding relationships with shepherding this space. Next slide. And this slide is of Betania, who is Damian Griffin's daughter, tossing flowers into the river as an offering with two dancers in the background. Betania I've known for more than half of her life at this point, out of collaboration with her father. And so just wanting to really honor that process and the process of developing relationships and community is the central goal of this work, so that we can deepen our urgency around our connection with one another and our connection with our built and natural landscapes. Next slide. So I'm going to breeze through these next slides because I know I've already gone beyond time, but I'm going to say that this latest iteration of the project now is called Awideya, which means all of us are here. And it's really rooted in my questions that began emerging in 2016 as I was invited by a curator in St. Croix to begin doing my work at home. And I had to ask myself, I had to add to my animating questions by asking myself, what do you bring with you when you are called home? Next slide. So in the next few slides, you'll see me dressed in white at my family's ancestral land in a 2016 ritual cleansing, and a walk through Christiansted, which is my hometown, an area that one neighbor characterized as the forgotten corner of Christiansted. Next slide. It's important to me that folks of all generations, as I was one of these young kids here growing up, are able to access the work and participate. And so this was the beginning of my bringing home what I had been developing mostly in the mainland. Next slide. On my head in this picture is me with a jar of water that I had carried that morning from Gallows Bay, where my father used to build fish traps, brought it to the site of my family's ancestral land. And now you see me pictured with other people walking behind me, including a small child blowing a conch shell. We're going to process through Christiansted, which is something that does not happen often in large groups anymore because of the way that transportation has been developed that allows people to skip Christiansted town to get to other parts of the island. And so it's unusual outside of carnival time to have people processing through the streets together. Next slide. And so we continued to do that in the next slide. We began following the young child and let her lead the way, which feels very important. Next slide. And eventually we made it to Gallows Bay, which is where my father built fish traps and where my daughter decided that this was her performance. Next slide. And in this, I apologize that I'm not describing all of the slides, but they're all in a series of me and others traveling with me. In this picture, someone is pouring the Gallows Bay water as we all pass the water among us to offer a hope or a wish for that space. Next slide. Before my daughter and I returned that water back to Gallows Bay, trying to really build in the connection between us, these waters and our landscapes and cultural legacies. Next slide. And now I'm moving into my last few slides, which is what now, what next? I want to say here that I was all set in 2016 after this, what I just talked you through, this walk through Christiansted. I was all set to begin developing performance in so-called abandoned spaces or spaces that are culturally endangered in my hometown. And then the 2017 hurricane season happened. And in response to this, in which Category 5 hurricanes, Maria and Irma, hit my home island dead on. Since then, the cost of living has gone up by more than 400%, and probably now in this economic time, more than that. Locals are finding themselves priced out. We've heard this story before, most recently, perhaps in New Orleans. The storms are increasing in frequency and their size and danger over time. And then we're contending with decades of industrial pollution that reached its head, its most recent peak last year when oil was being spewed through the air all over the south shore of my home island. So for me, many of these issues are about creating some visibility in a space that tends to be out of sight, out of mind, and that is like, I'll just say that as a Black space, you know, this Black ancestral space that is a part of the United States, it's not surprising how marginalized the space is. And at the same time, it would be in the interest of people in the mainland to be more connected with the issues and organizing that's happening there. And so I'm doing my part in terms of making those connections in the body and with the place. So we're animating this vision, activating a call and response, I'm calling it, between the colony and mainland, between people and place, and between the past and future. And by place, I mean the earth, the spaces, the water, nature, the values that come with being connected to place. We are becoming Awi, as I call it, all of us in the virtual realm after the pandemic. So figuring out how to build embodiment and community across generation and geography. And we're deepening the fish trap method, which is an adaptive method for collaboration that allows us to come into the space as we are and start to unearth more of what we have to bring into the space. Next slide. The next slide is all of us. It's a picture of 16 squares on Zoom, engagement that we've done with culture bearers from the US Virgin Islands, bringing together probably more collaborators than I could across geography if I were making everyone meet together in the same place and time. Next slide. Out of this work together over the past, since the fall of 2020, we've been working in this way and started working strongly in video. Here is a slide of a picture of the oil refinery in St. Croix, and the language says, an entire living, breathing, self-perpetuating, interrelated cosmography now lay under roads, buildings, tanks, piers, pipes, and stacks, belching offensive and deleterious effluvium into the summer sky. So next slide, our work has started moving toward researching the role of industry in the Bronx and in St. Croix, connecting people across those geographies specifically who are doing frontline organizing, and then through our creative process, trying to synthesize, illuminate some of the issues of our conversations and our research. In this slide, you see on the bottom, collaborators Kunuma Simmons, and behind her, Monica Marin. And at the top of the pic, they're in St. Croix at the area called Kraus Lagoon, which was destroyed by industry. And they've made their way into a water space there to perform ritual and also to capture image. And above them is a elevated walkway in which myself and collaborator Oshana James are tramping, which is a movement form and a celebratory form in St. Croix that's typically done with a large band overnight, and just trying to bring together these geographies and see the ways in which our creative practice can illuminate the connectivity among them. Next slide. I just want to note that, none of this comes from nowhere, that when I was a small child, there was a book had been published called Le'a We Cook, Let Us Cook. And that's part of where the name of this project comes from. Next slide, but also recognizing that recipes have become an important part of my work. As our bodies heal, how can we shepherd healing of the larger earth body? How does that attune us to what is needed? And so in this picture, you see an image from a video that I took from a fisherman that I apprenticed myself to in 2012, a collaborator, MK Abedu's image superimposed onto that, and then a recipe that says, recipe for healing, make space for laughter, sip holy basil tea, scream as if you're born this day, move your hips past shame, sweat into morning, serve without worrying what nobody think. I'm going to end there. So I hope that we're able to build some more recipes all together about how we're going to move forward, how we're going to deepen our relationships among us and within us and with this earth that holds us. Thank you. Andrea, I'm going to invite you back in.
Well, let's everybody gathering together, give a moment of breath. And I just wanted to say, and I'm trying to really like where it's seated in my body right now. I'm meant to think, and I'm thinking backwards right now. I'm even feel a little dizzy because there's so much richness and juicy thing and deepness, and also how deep you all of them, I feel like, are connected to land, and things that a lot of people they're feeling it, but they're trying not to be there. And how you finding these connections. And so just wanted to first give deep thanks to you, Paloma, for sharing. Then to you, Lehuanani, for sharing. and then you, Jill, for sharing. And I prepared questions. I did. Hearing all what you shared, my questions that I prepared feel even not that relevant right now, because a lot of things you already shared in your presentation and how you shared. So I'm actually, right in this moment, will create new questions and gathering. And then also I want to say, feel free to, if a question came up as a collective to build, please bring it in the room and cite the question for everybody. One thing that really crossed my deeply, because all of you going into this, if very places that are on many deep connections, that goes beyond like, oh, this is my dance that I make, nothing wrong about that, but you're going into the land, you're going into issues to sense it fully with your body. And so one thing that occurred to me in this cultivating embodied knowledge that you're gaining, right? You also gain other things, which is probably pain and grief and loss. And I was just wondering for yourself, on a very personal level, I would like to start, how you deal with that, or how this showed you up to you through these years going. And I felt for myself during the pandemic time, because everything slowed down, things showed up even more. That before it was so busy that I could just like put over there, and then suddenly they showed up more. So maybe you can just share this first, like on a very personal level, how this shows up in your own body, how you deal in your own embodied dance practice, what you do that you can actually even hold yourself. And please, this is for everybody of you, so unmute when you're ready, and then the other can speak again, you know.
Can start us off. This really takes me back to when I was at grad school, and I had a serious moment of seeing our community, physically our neighborhood, in need, when there was an explosion on 6th Street in East Village, which was right next to the NYU building, mm-hmm. and seeing the people who really showed up for the community and the people who didn't. And there was a really big distinction. Yeah. And it really had a huge impact on me, because I was seeing dance as a more selfish way to proceed through life. We were being told that we needed to focus on performances and not focus on the community, not focus on our neighbors, not focus on each other, not focus on, issues that were coming up through that whole experience. And then I was seeing people, other professors who were down there helping the police remove people from the street, helping the ambulance sort of like clear away. And it was a real moment where I stepped away from dance for a while, because I couldn't see a time where both of those things were relevant together. And it was really difficult to have that moment of, where does dance fit in my life when there are all these other social issues that seem so much more important, and how can I really combine the two of them together? And I wasn't able to make those connections again until I started working with a Maori choreographer, Jack Gray, who came a couple years later. And he made those connections for me again through an Indigenous perspective that I never felt like I was able to access growing up in the diaspora. And through that, it really just opened a whole new world of how am I using my body and my movement through frontline actions and through my own movement practice to carry a certain message forward and be able to have conversations and to continue that dialogue into other groups of people who, either don't know the frontline sort of activism world or don't know the dance world. How can those two spaces really merge? And when I was on Mauna Kea, and I said this in my presentation too, I really felt like my entire dance training had prepared me for that moment. And there was ooh, it always gets me a little emotional when I talk about it, but there's nothing more special than being able to dance up there with my brother, who has no experience in dance or hula or anything, but is an incredible chanter. To be able to do that with my cousin, to be able to do that with many people that I was either meeting or recognizing, because it's Hawaii and everybody knows each other. But also how the mountain also healed me through my own trauma. And this is talked about a lot. Jamaica Heoli Osorio talks about how the Mauna has healed people, how when we see her being violated so many times, one more time, you know, that's the idea, just one more telescope, just one more thing, that has a real effect. And so when people are able to look at the mountain and humanize her and think of her as a human or as a woman, and say, if a person was being violated in any way, it matters how many times it happens. And how can you heal your trauma through movement, through ground-based work, and connecting back to those environmental structures that don't just give us life here, but gave us life when humans were first created. Our Hawaiian origin story is evolution itself, which is really beautiful. And so that's where that genealogy line comes from. So I think just, giving people another perspective on what about it is identifying in your life, what are the traumas that you need to heal, and how can connecting to your own physical body and through the environment around you can heal yourself, and then how can you have that relationship, that reciprocal relationship back to the land. Lehuanani out.
This is Paloma speaking. A few things are coming to me, but maybe most present with me is that as we've started to move out of pandemic time, as Andrea has noted, there was a time where sort of everything was slowed, and we're moving, whether we like it or not, whether I like it or not, out of that time signature that I am feeling like I'm not building in as much opportunity to be like, to go walk along the Hudson River, or to go do the things in natural spaces that I have a valuable exchange relationship with. And I feel it in my body. Like, Wednesday, I got like a spasm in my back that still hasn't gone away. And this was a week in which that pandemic time collapsing felt very, very present for me. And so, I think we should be engaging in this healing work of ourselves and that relationship to our the ecologies that we are a part of, just on its own terms. And if we do not, we will not be well. We will not be well. We can't. We can't be well. We are part of this. I feel like in the meeting that we had to plan for this, Lehuanani really brought into the fore, and I don't want to speak for you, but it was really powerful for me to hear you say, we can't just keep saying, if we just disappear as humans, everything's going to be okay. We're a part of this place. We're of this place. And so that's kind of a cop-out. So how do we, build in an awareness and take the moment to realize, oh, I have a spasm in my back that's not going away because I'm not in right relationship with myself, with timing, with my natural environment. What is it? And that Advil is not going to fix that.
I'll add something. This is Jill. All of this resonates a lot. This idea, what Paloma just said about healing ourselves. I became really ill some years ago for a few years in response to environmental exposure from the waste that I was handling in my work. And it's been a long process of sorting that out and understanding that. And realizing that environmental harm is real. It's not just something we talk about. It's not just a theoretical thing. It's not just over there somewhere. And also realizing how I am so privileged as an artist, getting myself into this problem. But there are people who live in the communities I work in who live there and handle this waste all the time and have exposure all the time, who are not choosing that in the way I'm choosing. And, that hit home really deeply. And it made me realize a number of things. I think one is that this work is collective, that I can't just do everything because I will become collateral damage to the problem instead of being able to fix the problem as an individual. And how can we be, and I love, Paloma, you keep bringing up these images of the fish net, and it's such a potent image, right? Because how can we all be a human net in leaning on each other and giving and taking weight and all working together so that no one is sacrificed to the problem as we work to change, to heal. And I also realized that while we're trying to protect Earth and care for Earth, the Earth is also protecting and caring for us. And I think, like Lehuanani, you were speaking a lot about that in connection with the mountain. And I needed to become ill in order to learn that, because I think it's easy for those of us who want to make change to feel like it's all on us to make change. And in some sense it is, but in other senses, it's like the Earth is extremely powerful. And how do we hold that power and create room for that power, even as we feel responsibility to care for it? And I just want to underscore what Lehuanani said about the importance of healing self and point to the importance of embodiment in that process. I think something that's coming up in all of our presentations is the way that our own embodiment and our own connection to self is a gateway to connection to other things, to connection to each other, to connection to Earth, to connection to the natural world, which we are part of. And it feels like without being embodied in that way and being present, all of our efforts will just be like taking Advil. They will just be kind of these surface efforts to make change, to whatever, to create legislation, to do these things that look like the right steps, but we will not become aware in ways that lead to true respect and true change in a really fine-grained way. So I'll end there, but I think there's a lot of resonance with what you all have said in that. Jill out.
This is Paloma. Andrea, were you gonna? Okay. I just have one more thing to add. The research that the study group has been going in has also involved a look at the liberation technologies of my homeland, what happened in 1878 when women led the burning down of plantations on the west end of my island. Where do our histories teach us about insistence in the face of? And I'd like to say, I feel like what's emerging in this conversation right now, so I just want to name it, is also the way in which nature is teaching us liberation technologies. When I think about going home, I think about reclaiming a wildness that I felt as a child growing up in the country on a small island. And that's also a liberation technology that's at work and that I'm working to reclaim. And so this idea that both our written human history has things to teach us as we research, and also natural history and our own lived histories in relationship to nature have a lot to teach us. And I'm just feeling an emergent urgency around rooting as much of the research in that awareness as I am in the written histories, which is more resonant to me anyway. Yeah. Paloma out.
Thanks so much. I know they're soon coming in and let us know that we need to wrap up. And I really want to wrap it up with coming back to think about what is that entanglement that I heard right in the end, the entanglement between the mountain, the plants, the river, and the entanglement of us human. So what is that entanglement, and what has that intelligence, and even the repair, right? What is the repair if something gets damaged? We humans, even, sometimes feel like, we need to go in and resolving it. And maybe we just have to sit back and listen to the land and hear how who is there to repair, right? Who else is our ally? And thinking about the mountain and coming from an alpine background, so hearing a mountain and thinking about there comes this other object on top of this mountain, to see the stars, right? To see closer the stars. I'm like, why are you not standing just at the mountain and let the star come to you? Why you have to grab it and the lose of maybe the mountain, and with that mountain lose of biodiversity on that is only on that flora, it's only in that island, right? And what that plant or something has to say. And so just thinking, and I would like to go back there even with Jill, thinking, connecting the dots and the invisible. And with that, thinking about what in 100 years, and I'll leave these questions open and not answering actually. If you think climate change is time, right? So if you think from right on in 100 years, how would you tell, or somebody could read your dance history and your archive? And what do you think has to be written or be said? And which one is oral telling that you know the generation gives it? And what this would mean for the bigger dance community right now, the Dance NYC, how they have to find things to support this, what would be in 100 years. And with that, I say for you guys, thanks again, and for this connection and be in this shared space. And I give it back to Brooks.
Thank you, Andrea, Jill, Lehuanani, and Paloma for this beautiful conversation. To our attendees, I hope you were able to take away some transformative ideas and considerations. A final thank you to our sponsors, to Janice Young from Viscardi Center, and Jessica Ames and Pam Pritzker-Ridley from SignNexus for their invaluable support. We are heading over to the session follow-up chat in the community section to take a few questions and wrap up the conversation. So what's next? You can continue to experience the symposium, visit our sponsors in the exhibitor hall, create virtual meetups and online conversations at our community board, or take some time away from the screen and rest. To explore more concepts within life cycles, livelihoods, and legacies, we have 3 more daytime sessions coming up, all held at 2:30 p.m. Before that, at 1:30 p.m., you can take your lunch and/or head over to the exhibitor hall for our last virtual expo showcase. Tonight's program includes closing remarks from Dance NYC, artistic offerings by the Clark Center and Hunter College Dance Department, and a pivotal keynote conversation entitled Building Community Around Dance for a Future Society. At an important global tipping point for change, this conversation forecasts what building community around dance will demand of the dance field and the wider society as we know it. Knowledgeable practitioners in technology, education, producing, and presenting discuss the world they are preparing for and how they will serve it. We will be joined by Adham Hafez, Chris Walker, Kamal Sinclair, and Christopher McDowell on panel, and moderator Onye Azuzu. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you for joining today's session. A special thanks to our funders, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Howard Gilman Foundation, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, New York State Council on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts. A special thanks to our lead corporate sponsor, Con Edison, and our lead dance advocate, Jody Gottfried Arnold. Subsidies for the education and dance worker ticket tiers are made possible by the Arnold Foundation. A special thanks to our leader, host, and partner level sponsors: 92nd Street Y, Harkness Dance Center, Dance Education Library, Cataliote Law, Full Out Creative, Gibney Dance Center, Coombe Center for African and Diaspora Dance, The Actors Fund, Ballet Hispanico, Fit for Dance, Nai Ni Chin Dance Company, NDI Collaborative for Teaching and Learning, New York Live Arts, and Tom O'Connor Consulting Group. And last, but certainly not least, a special thanks to our Justice, Equity, and Inclusion partners: Art Beyond Sight, Art Space Sanctuary, Asian American Arts Alliance, Center for Traditional Music and Dance, the International Association of Blacks in Dance, Lotus Music and Dance, Museum Arts and Culture Access Consortium, National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, New York Foundation for the Arts, and Women of Color in the Arts. Up next, please feel free to rest, reflect, and eat a nourishing lunch. You may also check out our virtual expo in the exhibitor hall at this time. At 2:30, we begin our late afternoon sessions, and at 4:15, we gather in our daily debrief. At 6 o'clock, we gather for our final keynote presentation. Stay connected with us by posting your takeaways on social media using the hashtags DanceSimp, DanceNYC 2022, and DanceSimp 2022. On Instagram at dance.nyc, on Twitter at dance.nyc, and on Facebook at dance/NYC. Some features not to miss: build your agenda of sessions, connect with other attendees, join community conversations, visit the exhibitor hall. Don't forget to check out the 2022 Symposium digital program book. How are we doing? Did you like a session? Use the like feature on your favorite session. Got feedback for us? Take the post-event survey after March 19th and tell us how we did. Need help? Email us at customerservice@dance.nyc. A special thanks to our broadcast streaming partners at Full Out Creative. Thanks for joining. Keep in touch at dance.nyc.